the attribution strategies that you can enable with a CD like mParticle, I wanted to start with diving into why cross-device measurement in today's ecosystem is so difficult. Most companies have pieced together a data strategy over time. It's something that was much more siloed and single track that they eventually tried to bolt on different solutions. And I think what has happened is that we see as many different attribution strategies as there are companies to implement them. So I think one of the first challenges that everyone sees is that departments obviously speak different languages. So whether you're marketing or product or sales or analytics, you're all working in different silos, but at the end of the day, you need the same data from the same customers and stakeholders. And deciding what data to collect and how to pass it off to developers to have it properly implemented and managed across various tool sets is a daunting task. And very rarely is it done efficiently or to the effectiveness that every department within an organization is looking for. Furthermore, reconciling that data is very complex. Data infrastructure, as mentioned, gets very messy, especially when you start at one place that's solving for a single track and you gradually or very quickly try to approach a very complicated ecosystem of tool sets and different processes. Making sure that data is clean across such an organization without establishing an attribution or data management strategy at the outset is a nearly impossible undertaking that we see many companies running into issues with. And lastly, of course, everyone's busy. Our time is finite. All stakeholders are very busy. To tackle such a complicated problem that requires solution by committee, most brands don't have the time, resources, or processes to sit down and develop such a foundational data strategy that can solve for some of these issues. They have to focus on keeping pace with their customers and therefore are forced to build a data strategy, as mentioned, little by little, piecing together solutions without a more holistic approach, more taking a reactive quick fix approach. Of course, debugging and getting through an infrastructure that's built that way is a full-time job for multiple teams in and of itself. And I think within those issues, we obviously see implementation being one of the biggest challenges. So data inconsistency, miscommunication, misunderstanding of data collection requirements, not just between the teams that are mentioned, but more specifically between instrumentation engineers and product managers, is obviously something that we've all run into and that can cause really manual and laborious efforts to trying to just collect and make sense of our customer data. Obviously, we're living in an age where there's no shortage of data, but it really has become white noise, I think, for too many organizations, because there's just a constant questioning of the data quality. We have as many counts of specific users who have, completed a purchase event from a specific channel or campaign as there are systems or teams to go about measuring those counts. I think that inconsistency and that doubtfulness around the quality of our data is as much a problem as the challenges in setting up a useful or an efficient infrastructure. People not trusting it and letting tools fall by the wayside is obviously an effect of that. And I think, having a more holistic or a more purposeful data strategy is something that can solve that from the outset. So this is something that we really try to solve here at mParticle. mParticle really does enable a full customer data supply chain and a more purposeful data management strategy, which of course at the heart of is going to be attribution, knowing where users are coming from and allowing that to inform not just critical events such as purchase or registration, but getting a view of their entire journey and the value that the channels that they're being acquired or reacquired from is something, again, that requires a really solid data strategy that's been thoughtfully planned from the outset. So you've heard this over and over, and I'll probably repeat it again through this presentation, but data is one of the greatest resources available to brands, and good data is the lifeblood of any meaningful brand, especially in the DTC ecosystem or the DTC world that we live in today. And what you can do with your customer data is ultimately decided by what you collect and whether you trust or understand it, because siloed and fragmented data is going to impact the customer experience, internal operations, and ultimately your bottom line. So to actually make use of your foundational data layer is really difficult. It requires a well thought out data strategy, keeping information accurate and synchronized across multiple different systems and multiple different departments, again, is I think the greatest challenge that we see most brands facing today, which is exactly why we have built the mParticle to work the way that it has. So how does this affect attribution strategy? As mentioned, there's all sorts of data that we can collect, whether it's engagement data, whether it's product usage, whether it's conversion data, but it ultimately comes back to how we're acquiring or reacquiring users. Top of funnel is everything. We want to know where we're being most effective, what tactics, what channels, what content is engaging with users most, so that we can most efficiently increase time spent across those channels that we know are driving value, as well as identify areas where we can improve those that may be underperforming. So the benefits of sound attribution strategy are A, as mentioned, it increases efficiency. We want to improve that data accuracy and consistency through real-time validation. And that's only done with something that can give you real-time analytics and synchronization across all of your different acquisition channels, which are probably dependent on not just one, but multiple tools that necessitate talking to one another. A sound attribution strategy also is going to obviously accelerate your growth. You want to find users that are not just going to visit your website or install your app or come visit your brand presence once and then bounce off. You want to find ways to meaningfully and effectively engage with the users that are most likely to convert or drive value to your brand and stay meaningful, not just lose them after your first meaningful interaction. Also, you obviously need to measure install and post-install events. This is something when brands could rely more heavily on paid strategies was more easily implemented because it was the main channel. 90% of people's spend or marketing budgets went to paid campaigns, which is why 90% of the attention was paid to measuring and making sure that those campaigns were effective. But I think we can all agree that meaningful customer interaction is multi-touch, multi-pronged. So you can't just focus on that last click or that last mile where you may be acquiring a lot of users, especially converting users from paid channels. You need meaningful insights and interaction to what other touch points you've had with consumers and how it's ultimately informed that customer journey. However, to do that, again, requires synchronization across multiple tools and touch points. And that's where a sound cross-channel attribution strategy comes into play. And then ultimately, you're trying to improve your insight, improve your time to insight. So 24-hour batched analytics is not useful anymore. If I know someone came to my site and was looking at a single item, I can't retarget them or try and re-engage them through an organic channel like an SMS or a push campaign 24 or even 12 hours later. By then, they've probably made their purchase decision. And if I haven't engaged with them in a meaningful way, they've more likely than not gone and purchased something similar through a brand that was able to engage with them in a meaningful way. So real time really is everything when it comes to making use of your attribution data. So one use case I wanted to go in was to kind of talk through the evolution of attribution as we've seen it. I've seen the evolution of a lot of attribution companies, and a lot of them have stayed in kind of this old mentality of attribution, whereas others have tried to progress what attribution actually should mean for a brand. So like you mentioned, back in the days where 90% of marketing budgets were just focused on paid campaigns, attribution just focused on paid campaigns. So you basically had your two channels. One was paid, where you were acquiring users through campaigns A, B, and C, subgroups, ad groups, whatever you want to call them, X, Y, and Z. And you had really granular analytics into how each one of those campaigns and subgroups was performing. You got to see exactly how you were acquiring or reacquiring users, what value that was ultimately driving your brand. And then you were able to use those analytics, not necessarily to inform your view of the customer itself, but to inform your view of how you can better position or reposition those campaigns and subgroups to ultimately drive more value. Now, the catch-22 here was that obviously when you pay that much attention to only your paid channels, you're letting organic fall by the wayside. And for too long, attribution was giving you a really granular view of your paid campaigns or your paid initiatives. And then everything organic fell into a just big black box. You saw that 50, 60, sometimes 75% of your users were coming through organic, but you had no idea what that meant. Does organic mean that content is being shared? If it is being shared, is it being shared via email, via SMS? And if it is being shared, what content is being shared? How are my users engaging with it? Is this a new user that I'm acquiring? Is this a user that's seen one of my paid campaigns that I may be re-engaging or reacquiring? And then how can I ultimately leverage those insights to inform not just my organic growth strategy, but my paid campaigns as well? So this limitation is something that I think was inherent to a lot of attribution providers, probably up until about 5 or 6 years ago when this issue came to light, and attribution providers took a step back and said, okay, obviously organic is driving just as much, if not more value for brands than paid. Whether or not it's a last click, it is our brand presence. People are always more likely to engage with something that comes to them or is discovered organically rather than something that is pushed to them programmatically. And that's why we've assumed this view of what a cross-channel attribution strategy is. So if you can choose the right combination of analytics tools, but more importantly, attribution providers, you should have a neat view of every channel, whether it's paid. And then within organic, whether that organic means, is this an email that's being shared? Is this content that's being shared via social? Is this something that's being pushed out via SMS? Is it a push campaign that's coming from my CRM? It's this level of granularity outside of paid campaigns that I think really informs a good cross-channel attribution strategy. Because again, within each one of these channels, you may have an email campaign that's purposely being sent out to users. But if users are engaging well with email versus say SMS, that's an insight that you want to know. And you want to be able to leverage that to try and encourage other users to share content over a channel that may be converting better, like say email versus SMS. So this is our view. It's something that you should always be leveraging insights from every channel to inform your performance or your decisions made in other channels. You always want to bring those insights and that performance back to your view of the customer. So regardless of where a user is being acquired or what the engagement is, you want that to come back to inform your unified customer profile. So you have a view of every different campaign or channel or touch point that you've had with that user and figure out how to make them engage with your brand more meaningfully. So as mentioned, mParticle as your CDP, we have over 250 integrations with the leading attribution providers in the market. Here's some of the ones that we like to highlight. So obviously we started as a mobile-focused company, so we work with all of the leading mobile-focused attribution providers, each of which brings their own strength to the table. So for instance, we work with Branch, which recently acquired Tune. I think Branch was also known for its dynamic link creation and therefore had really good insights into organic acquisition channels. So if you wanted a keen sense of what was going on, what content was being shared, what the viral coefficient of certain pieces of content or pages within mobile apps or other engagement strategies was, Branch always seemed like a very good partner for a lot of brands on that front. AppsFlyer was always known for measuring very well and a leader in the paid mobile install campaign space and remains there. I think Coachava has always been a really strong player as it relates to specifically Facebook campaigns, but also post-install and tracking abilities and in-app activities. And Adjust, who just announced today that they raised over nearly $250 million, $226 million. It's a really good measurement of holistic source tracking, marketing, and performance across all channels. And I think that raise just goes to speak to how important the market is recognizing that solid attribution really is to brand growth and brand engagement. We also partner with several multi-touch attribution vendors. One of the ones highlighted here is Conversion Logic. So as mentioned, you really want to be making use of cross-channel insights. You don't want your data siloed and reinforming solely the channels that data is acquired from. You want to be able to leverage data across all of your acquisition channels to make those channels as effective as possible. And Conversion Logic has been a great partner on that front. Awesome. So given that overview, without further ado, I did want to turn it over to my colleague, Patrick Crosby. Patrick is our head of partner solutions here at mParticle, also is the man that built all of the aforementioned attribution integrations, and he can actually go in and show you how you can go about building, or excuse me, activating one of these attribution integrations within your mParticle instance. Patrick, take it away.
Great, thanks, John Joe. So I wanted to spend some time today actually walking you through how you could set up an attribution integration in mParticle. So as some of you may know, mParticle is a CDP. So ultimately, our goal is to help our customers, who are typically B2C brands, take any of the first-party data that they have across mobile, web. We also bring data in through API connections, and we pull in data from many of our partners and actually get that to any of the solutions that they might need. And so our ecosystem covers all of the different solutions, from analytics to data warehousing, to obviously marketing, advertising. So there are solutions, as John Joe mentioned, with over 250 different integrations. And specifically on the attribution side, we'll dig into a connection with AppsFlyer. We'll look at two different ways to connect this attribution vendor. So the primary ways that you can connect data for an attribution vendor are, one, through an events integration. So that supports sending data from mParticle to that vendor so that you would be able to drive the attribution of any of your campaigns. So understanding what may have driven an install, what may have driven a purchase, et cetera. The other way that you can actually connect mParticle to an attribution vendor is through a feed integration. So bringing back data from a partner like AppsFlyer so that you can understand the actual attribution result. So what actually drove this install, and connecting that, say, to a marketing platform like Braze or Interpol. So we'll walk through both of those today, just to give you some insight into how easy that is and some of the flexibility that you'll have in actually driving that setup through mParticle. So I've pulled up AppsFlyer's overview page here in our platform. This gives some basic detail about the integration, also talks a little bit about the platforms that are covered. So for this mobile measurement vendor, we cover both Android and iOS. And because it's an attribution vendor, there are tons of data types and identities that are supported. So you can send any or all of these different data types to AppsFlyer. And in order to set up that events integration, so we'll start with the outbound, so sending data to AppsFlyer. You click into our setup, we'll select our event output, and we'll configure. You'll enter a couple of details. So you'll actually give this configuration a name so that you'll have a name for your system within mParticle. And then you would enter your developer key here. I'll enter a test key for our example today, and you would save this to your connections. So this sets up the AppsFlyer configuration. So at this point, you have a configuration to which you can connect any of the data within mParticle. And so in the instance that we're looking at today, I actually have data coming in from a variety of different places. So here's my live stream. You can see some of the events as they're populating into mParticle. So I'm getting data from iOS. Here's a session end event. Here's a custom event, what we call an app event. Here's some data from Android, more session ends, session starts, and you could dig into any of these to get more of the detail. But there are tons of different events that could come into that system. And so what you'd want to do now is determine, what do I want to connect to this specific AppsFlyer instance? So for this example, I'll walk through connecting an iOS input. So I've got my iOS data connected to my mParticle workspace. You can see some of the different solutions that I've already connected to this input. And then I'll add my new AppsFlyer configuration. Clicking on Connect Output, I'll select AppsFlyer and select the new AppsFlyer config. Have the option to add your Apple ID here. You can set a minimum platform version so that we will only send data from that platform or greater. Here I'll go with no filter, so we send all of the data and we will add that connection. Once I've done that, we are now sending data from our iOS input to AppsFlyer, but I have a couple of other things that I can actually configure so that I can set up some customizations. We've got a variety of different ways to do that. One is rules. So rules allows me to actually set up really custom ways to process data as it comes in or as it goes out of mParticle. And so for this outbound connection to AppsFlyer, I could set up some specific rules. So actually write code that would adjust the events from my iOS data before they hit my AppsFlyer endpoint. So we have some of our more technical or kind of data-driven users leveraging this to do some more detailed customizations around those integrations. One of the faster ways to do some of this mapping is through our custom mapping. So AppsFlyer actually has the concept, and much of this is driven by some of the endpoints that they're leveraging. So if you think about Facebook, they have their own designated predefined events. AppsFlyer has a similar concept of in-app events that they've defined. So some of the key events that you would want to track. But they know that many customers may name these slightly differently. So for example, if I have this add payment info event, this could exist in mParticle under a slightly different name. So we want to make sure that any event that we've mapped in mParticle is actually getting sent out to AppsFlyer in the right format. And so I can go through and find what is the actual event name that exists in mParticle that maps to this. So add payment info actually maps to pay info entered. It's very similar naming, but without having that designation, you wouldn't get the benefit of having that direct mapping into that standard AppsFlyer event. So you can continue to do that for a variety of different events to set up those customizations. And this filtering option gives you tons of flexibility to do that across all of those different custom mappings for AppsFlyer. The other option that I can do as a customization to this integration is user sampling. So we do see customers that are starting with a new vendor, be it an attribution vendor, or they're working with an analytics provider, or a marketing automation provider, and they don't want to send all of their data from day one. So they may do some user sampling. You could also imagine a case where you're doing some testing across multiple different types of vendors. And so you may want to do a split and only send, say, half of your data, or say 30% of your data to AppsFlyer. And so you could set that up through this user sampling filter. Once I've done that, I've got all my customizations entered. I save that. I now have AppsFlyer as an additional output for my iOS setup. One other thing I'll walk through for that event setup is our data filtering. And so because mParticle is so focused on providing our customers with the ability to manage their privacy, all the security that's associated with managing customer data, we allow our customers to be very specific about what data and what identities get down to any of the different partners that they're leveraging. And so we've worked with AppsFlyer and we work with all of our partners to determine, what event types do they support, what identities do they support, and we've typically focused on all of the specific events and identities that make most sense for that platform. But we also know that from a customer by customer basis, they may want to limit what they're sharing with a given partner. And so in addition to the filters that the partners have set up for their integration, our customers have the final say and can go in and designate what types of events or what categories of events they want to send or not send to a given partner. So you'll see here on the far right of the screen, all of the different types are turned on now for AppsFlyer. But if I said, I'm not interested in sending any of my social events to AppsFlyer, I want to switch that particular segment of events off, I could toggle that off. And so without having to go and change the code or re-implement any SDKs or any of the API calls, you're very easily able to set up filtering around user identities, event types, screen types, etc. So that's setting up the output. So now we're sending data from our iOS input to our AppsFlyer output. And that enables us to now drive the attribution analytics that AppsFlyer provides by getting all the data that we've implemented in our iOS mobile app to AppsFlyer. The next thing that we'll look at is the AppsFlyer feed. So taking data back in from an attribution partner. So I'm going to jump back over to my directory page. I will discard some of the changes that I made there. And I will search for AppsFlyer. So we set up our output. We're now going to go to our input. This will bring me to my inputs page. We've got a couple of them set up already, one for Braze, Conviva, Kochava, so another attribution vendor. For Braze, for example, we're bringing in data like email opened or push notification received. For Conviva, which is a media platform, we're bringing in data about people's video watching experiences. Did this buffer? Did someone finish that video, for example? So tons of insights can be brought back into mParticle. For our attribution vendors, what we typically bring in is an attributed install or an attributed re-engagement or an attributed purchase event. And so those types of insights can be valuable if you're connecting them to other platforms or want to send those downstream to a data warehouse tool. Again, I'd go in and give this a configuration name. I can select the platform that I want to associate with this feed. So in this case, I am ingesting iOS data from AppsFlyer. I will save this, and this will generate a token. And this token is actually used, and you would enter this into your AppsFlyer platform to actually make this connection. And this uses the AppsFlyer postback capabilities to send that data to AppsFlyer whenever an attribution event is determined. Once I've created the connection, again, I'd want to go over, or created the configuration rather, I want to go over and take this and actually connect it. And so this is now an input. So I have data coming in from AppsFlyer, and I can decide where do I want to send this. So how do I want to leverage this data against other platforms, or do I want to send this to a data warehouse? For this example, I'll take my AppsFlyer data, and I'll say I want to send it to Iterable. So I have an email and push notifications provider. I want to personalize my messaging based on the campaign that drove the install for my app. And so I want to make sure that my email and push notification platform knows the campaign, the publisher for the various ad campaigns that I'm running. I will set this to active. I'll add that connection. And now I have my AppsFlyer feed data connected to my marketing automation tool. Again, I can do some of the rules, the custom mapping. So I have tons of leverage around how I can take that data. In this case, the custom mapping is specific for Iterable. So they have the concept of an update subscription. So I could, if that was relevant to the AppsFlyer data, actually map that into the correct event for Iterable. So two different ways to connect an attribution vendor to mParticle, both the event, so sending data out to that attribution vendor. And for that, some of the key value that our customers see are, one, just around the efficiency. So being able to not have to re-implement all of that event capture, user identity management across all the different vendors. You're doing that once within mParticle, and you can connect that to your attribution solution. You can connect that to your marketing automation solution, connect that to your analytics tool, and you can ensure that all of the same events and identity are being captured across all of those different tools. And then two, we talked about the feed integration. So bringing that in, those insights back in from AppsFlyer so that you could drive all of that detail across other vendors. So now you can easily connect data that you're getting and collecting from AppsFlyer to those marketing automation, to those analytics tools. So you're creating that 360-degree view of the customer.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick. So I'm not sure if we have any questions coming through. Let me just check the log. But I wanted to open it up now for questions. If anyone on the line has any questions specifically about cross-platform attribution strategies, about anything that Patrick covered during the implementation as well as activation of attribution data, we would be happy to discuss in further detail.
Yeah, I do have one question. Do you see any customers that are utilizing attributed data from an attribution vendor and populating that into any tools for marketing optimizations?
Patrick, I'm not sure if you have. I can speak to one. I can't mention the brand name, but thinking about leveraging actual attribution data for organic engagement campaigns. One brand was seeing a lot of success specifically around one piece of content that they were pushing out. They noticed that they had really much higher engagement, several orders of magnitude higher than the other content-based campaigns that they were putting out. So they brought in those insights, and through their CMS and their CRM, I believe at the time they were using Braze, they were actually able to push out some really successful push and SMS campaigns. Using the insights, knowing exactly which cohorts were engaging with the specified data around their paid campaigns, they were hypothesizing that they would also see much higher conversion rates based on that attribution data. So again, they ingested it, they were able to activate it against some of the CRM campaigns that they had set up within Braze, and then their hypothesis was correct. They were actually seeing much better organic engagement through those channels as well. So that's one example that I can think of. Patrick, I'm not sure if you have any good examples on that.
Yeah, I think similar to that, one example that I've commonly heard is just when you're running sort of a cross-channel campaign that's involving both paid and owned media, being able to connect the insights, so understanding that you saw that conversion from your advertising campaigns, your paid campaigns, and connecting that insight then to your CRM or to your email platform. That platform, in this case with mParticle specifically, you're also able to bring back in a conversion there. So you can see how they actually acted on the email or push notification that you have. And so connecting all of those insights very easily in mParticle can really help drive.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think to that point, reversing direction with that data flow. If you see certain cohorts that are more likely to engage with, say, SMS versus email, like I share content all the time to my wife, but unless it's shared via text, she's not likely to engage with it. Conversely, my parents only check their email and barely know how to work a text message. So if I want to get something in front of them, I know that if I'm using a share widget within either an app or the mobile web, that it's best sent out over email. And then with insights, you could probably build cohorts, seeing who's engaging best with content shared over specific channels. And then you know that you probably want to engage the cohort that contains my wife with an SMS or a push campaign, while you'd probably be better suited dropping cohort and lookalike audiences for my parents into an email campaign. So again, just being able to leverage data from wherever it's being collected and activating it against your entire stack makes for just a much more holistic, engaging customer strategy in our view. And it's one of the great things about not just having a CDP, but within that, a really solid and well thought out attribution strategy as well. So I don't see any other questions coming through. I'll open it up if anyone wants to speak up, has a question. Nope. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for the time and for attending the webinar. As always, you can get in touch with us. Just go to our website and info@mparticle.com, or if you're an existing customer, talk to your sales rep more about what you can do, and specifically within attribution, also the partnerships team. We are always happy and excited to help out. So I want to thank everyone again and hope everyone has a great rest of their Wednesday.